when I got introduced to Tom and Jason after having eaten there for 20 plus years. It was back in November of 2021. So the war hadn't, wasn't a twinkle in anybody's eyes except for Vladimir Putin. And when we talked about a movie, the one thing that remained from what you saw tonight was the theme of fathers and sons. That was always at the core of it. But it was going to be a very different movie in that there was no war. And it was going to be more about the changing of the guard and a reluctant father who had, loved and shepherded this restaurant from a newspaper stand to what the world knows it as today over 54 years. And the renovation was going to be a part of that story. And then the war happened, and we hadn't started filming yet, but there was still interest on the part of Tom and Jason for me to tell their story. So I knocked on their door again after having not seen them for several weeks or months and said, if you're going to tell your story, any restaurant in any city can tell their story, but there's like a right time, I think, for any story or the right angle. And I said, given how Tom, your father-in-law, Jason, your grandfather, started the storefront as a refuge to displaced Ukrainians after World War II, if this war does happen, the parallels, you can't deny them. There might be more reason to kind of look at the past, as part of this present war. And they were in agreement, but we also said we want to go about this very gently. And so as you saw the movie, our first day of filming, Act 1 is day 11 of the war. So we didn't just jump in immediately. There were a lot of news crews there for that first week or two. And, the staff, they couldn't make heads or tails of my crew versus like a CNN news crew. And so Jason told them on that first day, he's like, no, Mike and his team, they're with us. And I don't think anybody really understood what that meant until they kept seeing me come back over 25 times over a year. And they were like, third of the way through, they were like, oh, he really is with us. And I think, it's been a journey, and, we all care deeply for one another, and, obviously wanting to see the war end, so. But if there's any questions, I want to give you guys a little background to get us started, but if there was anything I'm an open book, so ask anything except my social security number, that's okay. I don't care. Yes?
What's your favorite dish at Veselka?
Oh, that's hard.
I'll tell you ours.
I love the stuffed cabbage with the red sauce.
Yeah.
Obviously the varenyky or pierogi. The borscht is amazing. I hate beets, but their borscht, like you don't even know it's beets. It's amazing. It's so good, and all the desserts are really amazing. So, when I go in there now, one of the payoffs of many rewards of doing the movie is anytime I'm in there, they slip a dessert dish under my nose, even if I'm just going in to say a quick hello. If I'm like sitting at the counter at the front, like leaning, all of a sudden I'll see one of their, like the honey cake will slide in front of me, and I'm like, I didn't ask for that. They're like, we know you want it. We know you're not going to ask, but and I always have their dessert. So, yeah.
What's yours?
Banana buckwheat pancakes.
Oh yeah.
Breakfast. The kasha and the kalbasa.
Oh yeah.
Breakfast is you could sit there for 2 hours.
And I can't emphasize enough, this is one of the things that, I would hear it as we were filming, that everything is handmade, and I would see it. But I'm thinking, there's gotta be certain dishes that they're ordering in, and maybe they're just putting their own touch on something. There was one dessert in particular, I forgot what they call it, but it's basically like a chocolate mousse or a thick chocolate custard. And the way that it's in this really nice, golden tin bowl, I said to one of the managers, Slava, I'm like, where do you order this from? He's like, no, Mike, you're not getting it. We make everything, everything. And I was like, that's amazing. Because when you go downstairs into that little narrow kitchen, it really is a factory. If you think it seems small on screen here, put a crew of 7 people with 2 cameras in there, and you're trying to stay out of their way. It's a feat. Yes?
So as the arc of the story changed for
Yeah.
you, did you envision from to know when the story was going to be done?
Yeah, so that's a great question. When you do a documentary, you still do a beat sheet of 32 to 35 scenes or so, kind of with the things that are going to happen in a timeline, and also kind of what you hope will happen. And so you'll have kind of multiple ladders on a sheet of if this doesn't happen, maybe this will happen, and if this happens, you'll follow this person or that person. And there were a lot of surprises, like the baseball team, which kind of becomes a central moment in Act 2. That wasn't revealed to me that they were coming for security purposes until 2 days before. So, we had already been filming, I think 6 months at that point, and I had no knowledge that this could be a story point. And then as you saw when they were there having the meal in the restaurant with Jason and Vitaly, there was, it was the first time you get the perspective of someone from Ukraine sharing their, immediate thoughts. And it was just so striking on the day, and I think in the movie, but that was something I didn't know was gonna happen. The scene with the mayor, I don't know, I wasn't here, I had stepped out, so I don't know how you all respond to it, but in New York, a New York City audience that knows who Eric Adams is, I mean, there's audible gasps, and I'll be in the back of the theater and see people's heads turning, did he just say what I think he said, And when that happened, that was day 2 of our filming, again, it was the storytelling gods were giving me the perfect, left turn into your Act 2 of okay, you can't really look at your local government leaders to lead all the time. Jason's got to step up. And you just go with the flow, you evolve with it. I kind of knew the second answer to your question is you also have to think of the best audience, the best timing for a story, and I always knew that a good target was opening theatrically or on streaming during the second year commemoration of the war, which was February 24th, and we opened up on February 23rd. So I kind of had to back out of that, and based on that, I kind of knew, okay, I'm going to tell a year in the life. Now that said, if something amazing or super dramatic had happened, even as I was locking picture in August, September, before we started getting into all the, music and color correction and sound mix, which takes many months, I would have reopened up the edit, and maybe the movie wouldn't have come out when it did. But I think it was important, especially when I was seeing, and as we all saw, the change in sentiment just in our own government towards Ukraine happening in the fall. That's when I was oh no, I really need to get this out, because this is kind of, showing that, again, we shouldn't always look to our government leaders. Guys like Tom and Jason and the community can do big things. Yes?
Two-part question. Have you been doing a lot of festivals, and also how is the film being distributed?
Great question. Thank you. So, because I chose the route of going theatrical with it, we were only, once you do a theatrical, you can't do any film festivals unless you're invited to do an out-of-competition special event screening. So, based on the timing of the movie being done and when we were going to release theatrically, the only festivals we could even apply to were Sundance and Santa Barbara International. We got passed over for Sundance, but we got into Santa Barbara. So we literally the movie was done, I think, on February 3rd. It premiered February 9th in Santa Barbara, and then it opened a week and a half later in 4 cities in Ukraine. 4 cities in the United States, 4 cities in Ukraine as well, February 23rd. So it was, a very kind of calculated choice, but high risk on some level of saying, okay, we're not going to go the festival route. And then the second question you had about streaming, in all honesty, we're having a struggle finding a home for it. Nobody's knocking on our door. Those that we've gone out to, which are all the big players, and it's all the heads of acquisitions at all these places. We haven't gotten passes necessarily, but they're just sitting on it. And the ones where we have gotten commentary, Terry Steiner International, who does all the airline distribution, they passed on it because the word war is in it. And because it's about anything with Ukraine, they also said the movie's about Israel, Palestine, nobody is putting on planes. So it's very disappointing because media controls everything, as we know, and I'm getting a front row seat to see this happen. I have no doubt it will come out. It's just a question of what's the model and what's going to be presented by the outlets to get it out there, and how much will they bury it amongst other content. So we'll see. The other thing is, some people have been like, oh, it doesn't really have a lot of sharp edges. It's a really gentle, sweet movie. And I'm like, yeah, I intentionally made like the Mr. Rogers Neighborhood of documentaries, because how many true crime documentaries do we have? Do we need another? No. We can all enjoy like a nice, sweet movie where you cry a handful of times, But the distributors, they want sharp edges. So, but to that point, where I can use all of your help, if you're willing, is, go online. If you like the movie, like go to IMDb tonight, go to Rotten Tomatoes, rate it, put a comment about it. I can't tell you how important that is to like these distributors realizing maybe we're missing something. If there's audiences in all these different states, not just New York saying they love it, then they take it more serious. Yes?
How do the folks at Veselka feel about it?
First of all, I love your shirt. It's wonderful. They love the movie. I showed it to them, I think 3 different versions. And I always was very honest. I was like, look, I want to honor you guys. If there's anything that you don't feel comfortable with, let's discuss it and see. And they didn't ask me to take anything out. Even the mayor stuff, like I was like, they're gonna want me to take that out, And they agreed with me. I mean, I didn't even have to like defend it. I think Tom was very, like he laughed and he was just like, yeah, I mean, he had a microphone on him. The camera was in his face. He knew it was all there and happening. It was a press day. So it was not like I was, had a 1,000mm lens and I was 100 feet away. Like, he's here, I'm here, the camera's there. He knew what he was up to. So, yeah, they're really pleased. And one of the nicest reward for me, and a very unexpected one, was during one of the Q&As recently. Tom said that his relationship with Jason is better than it's ever been. They are closer than they've ever been. And he kind of jokes when he said it, but I know he means it. He's like, Mike became our therapist, which I didn't have that intent. And when I got into the movie, even though I know there was gonna be a father and son theme, they really did hold a lot of the dramatic parts of their story close to their vest until like the end of the process. So, you're seeing a movie in linear real time, and when Jason reveals that towards the end about how his mom like fully like left the family to go away. I didn't know, no one ever told me that over the 8 months prior. That was revealed in the moment you see it. And what was just so crazy was, I guess he felt it was important to share something so personal at that point because he recognized the impact sharing that with Vitaly had on Vitaly. So he just felt like, okay, now I probably should tell you this. And I never, the way I work is I really listen to the room. I don't press anybody too hard, So, when they were comfortable, they opened up. And so, yeah, I'm thankful that they really love it.
And I gotta say, getting to know the people was really well done. Like
Thank
I
you.
feel like I know those, well, actually, almost everyone to some degree, and that was beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, that's the other thing. It's like there's so many amazing documentaries nowadays, but I think a lot of stuff is overcut, and it's more about style over substance. And this is a movie, I don't know if any of you here have seen Euro Dreams of Sushi, which came out in like 2012. And that was kind of, because I had never done a documentary like this, so that was a hallmark for me of a movie where it's like it takes its time. It's about like the people and the textures and the world. And, maybe some people might say, critics might say, oh, well, your movie feels a little dated or something. To me, there's no there's no expiration date on good people or intriguing people or something that elicits emotion. To this day, I mean, the show MASH, especially the episodes that Alan Alda directs, like you'll be weeping by 15 minutes into that episode. To me, that's as good television as anything coming out today. So I have a problem when people will, not recognize what you're saying, because I think it's just like, it's important that it's about the people. It's not about me being the editor. It's just how is the event or the people? So thank you.
The feeling was right there too, as a Ukrainian American myself, that the feeling was in there, what it's like to be around Ukrainians of different generations that come to America.
Thank
so
you.
That feeling was really good.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I wish it obviously cannot happen, but Volodymyr, I wish he was alive and I could meet him. There were so many Twilight Zone moments of like, I was supposed to direct this movie and I'm not like a person that believes in that, but on this, I can tell you a couple where even though they're, out of the operations out of New York City, their family lived in West Orange. I grew up in a town called Far Hills, New Jersey, and 45 minutes out of Midtown Manhattan. And when we were getting all the photos, they had to come from Volodymyr's daughter-in-law, Mikola. His son is mentioned, so it's Mikola's widow. And I said to Jason, "Oh, I'm happy to go to her. Where is she?" And he goes, "Oh, in Bridgewater, New Jersey. Do you know where that is?" I go, "Yeah, it's like 5 minutes from where I grew up and where my parents are now." And I literally have passed her house my entire life. Then I go, "Where's the graveyard where Volodymyr and Nicole are buried?" He goes, "Oh, it's in Bound Brook, New Jersey." I go, "Oh, yeah, I know where that is. It's 10 minutes away." And I've been passing that cemetery my entire life. So this is where it gets crazy. So I go to the cemetery, this huge, beautiful Ukrainian cemetery in Bound Brook. And I'm standing at like the first major crossroads, and you can see this big tower in the background that you see in a shot. And I was going there to just film what you see just on my iPhone. And Jason didn't know I was going. It was a random Saturday. I think it was like July 7th. And there's an importance to that. So I text him and I send the photo and I go, from where I'm standing, should I go back, forward, left, or right, using that little intersection? And he texts back, "You're standing at his grave." And it was literally in front of me, but I didn't know Cyrillic, so I didn't know until I put a Google Translate. And then it said, Volodymyr Darmakwal. And the date was his 120th birthday. Yeah, it was July 7th, 2023 when I was there. So yeah, a lot of weird Twilight Rod Serling things, but some things are meant to be. Yeah.
Do you have any other feature-length work? And
Yeah.
do you have anything going forward?
So the thing going forward is a project I call Sleep. I'm still catching up on it. I'm so tired. The movie, literally we've been in theaters since February 23rd, so I've been touring with the movie and just so much going on. But my last documentary is on Criterion Channel called Floyd Norman, An Animated Life. And it's about the first black animator at Disney. Floyd's gonna be 89 this summer. And he's an amazing guy. He worked with Walt Disney, first black animator at Disney, and had this storied career. Then on his 65th birthday, in I think 2001 or 2, Disney forced retirement. And instead of, you're with his storied career, right? They forced retirement. And so instead of going, because his wife worked at Disney, he basically would come in with her every day and he hijacked a cubicle and he wouldn't leave. And he didn't even have a pass card. And so he becomes this inspirational figure to everybody that's there, and people love having him there. I don't want to give too much away of the latter third, but it's on Criterion Channel now. So, yeah, very different movie than this. Floyd, again, just a really enjoyable human being to dive into someone's life like Floyd is. I was very fortunate. Yeah.
Yes, I just want to say thank you for the movie.
Thank
It came
you.
out in the right time. I'm here representing Charlotte for Ukraine. I'm a Ukrainian
Yes.
myself. I live in the United States us. One of the first fundraisers I've done within the first 3 weeks of war, when Russia invaded Ukraine. I'm as a full-time musician, I did a fundraiser, and one of the things I asked for the audience who attended, I said, please don't forget about Ukraine, please don't forget about us. And since that moment, so many people did forget, and so many people chose, a different path. They are caring about other things, which probably are also very important things. But we very much appreciate people who still coming to see the movies about Ukraine, still supporting us as an organization, and thank you so much for doing what you've done for
And
Ukraine.
thank you, and thank you for what you do. Yeah, it's when we filmed the baseball sequence, at the time, we just thought, you even hear Jason say in the movie, he's like, oh, well, it's Brooklyn on a Friday night. But that was really the beginning of this shift. And we were starting to see that there was a lessening of support over like the 6-8 months that followed. And it's not to say that people didn't care, but they just weren't kind of like showing up the way that they were. Like, I don't know if anyone here was in New York City during the first like month or two, but I would say to Jason, the feeling anywhere in the city, it's palpable. It felt like 9/11 all over again. There was this very kind of shared universal feeling of, support. And it lasted a substantial amount of time, but yeah, now I even find, because I'm so obviously aware, given my involvement with this movie, even with Ukraine getting funding in the last couple of weeks, it's like people are like, okay, we can wash our hands. We don't have to talk about it anymore on social media. The news doesn't really cover it. But then you'll see like the Wall Street Journal or a major publication say, this war specialist is saying that, in the next first week of May, Putin is sizing up some sort of major tactical advance because he's got a big speech coming up. It's like, but why am I just reading this? Why am I not seeing this on like the nightly news and every channel? And again, media is very scary to me, how it really can set a temperature for all of us. And it's like, there's the term, I guess, in print journalism, if it bleeds, it leads. And it's like, a friend of mine was saying the other day, he's making a really great doc on something, and one of the big distributors he was talking to asked him, does anybody die in it? And he said, no, somebody comes close. And they're like, no, we need premises where someone dies. I'm like, are you kidding me? So you're not gonna watch the movie because he just said someone doesn't die in it? This is where we're at. So, it's scary. Yes?
Could you tell me about the yellow chair?
Oh, the yellow chair.
Seems
Yeah, it's so warm.
very loved in a way that the rest of the furniture is not.
Yeah, it's, they have many, many dogs. And the dogs, I don't know if it's a mix of the dogs and or just, because that's Tom's chair, right? Like, so I don't know if it's his elbows rubbing it in part with like the dogs like loving it and scratching it. But it was funny because Sally, Tom's wife, she was there the day we filmed that and had no problem. She didn't even make a comment. And when she saw like an early cut, she was so bothered by the chair. She's like, you can't show my house having this chair. And she'd like laugh at it too. It wasn't like she was being, hyper-critical. But she's like, is there something with like special effects you can do? and you could paint it out. Like, you can do stuff, but I was like, we don't have the budget or the time to have somebody painting out the chair. But you'll see later on when Vitaly's sitting in towards the end, it's reupholstered.
Right.
Not that Vitaly's like claiming it for himself now, but it was reupholstered by then, so. Yeah, no, I love stuff like that because to me, like, it tells a story, right? You go, oh, he loves that chair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any more talk about the renovation going on there?
So there's a lot going on. So actually in Brooklyn, in a few weeks, they're opening up a commissary kitchen. And the initial goal was there was just gonna be a commissary kitchen that would kind of support and supply 9th Street from the movie. But they got enough space that it actually is gonna have a dining area. And then the city is giving them like tables outside. So it's gonna be a mini Veselka in Brooklyn, like right off the Lorimer stop, I think. Then the renovation, I think what they're gonna do is, because they're pulling most of the staff out of the basement kitchen to put over in Brooklyn, the sense I get is they're gonna start retooling the kitchen now that a lot of people will be out, and they're just gonna piecemeal fix things. I mean, Tom and Jason have never asked me, but the reason why I have those visual effects in there so you can see what could happen to things is to show them how bad it is. I hate the idea of them changing the place, and I've never told them, but they know kind of now from Q&As how I've said this, like when those boards fly in and like that beautiful open area that has that nice old like 1950s diner vibe, like I show that to not even inform the audience, but to tell them, don't do it. Don't mess with something that works, you know. Yeah.
How did you convince Veselka to be a part of the documentary?
I think it didn't take a lot. I mean, they did, from that November meeting in 2021 to when we started filming, they definitely disappeared. Like, I questioned if they were gonna move forward with it. But I think for Jason, Tom didn't know this until we were done and the movie was out in the world. Jason privately said to me, I would love this. He's like, I don't wanna, paint you into a corner, like you have to tell the story you wanna tell. But he was like, I really want something that's like an homage, or pays homage to what my father did over 54, 55 years. And I think Tom initially, I think on the first day, I thought I overheard him, like almost like he was annoyed with like the scope and size of everything. Because we had multiple cameras and like a crew of like 7 or 8 people. And so I remember him thinking like, I thought I heard him say like, can't they just do this on like an iPhone or something? He was so bothered with the scope of it. But then over a couple of shoots, I think he really got it and understood like we were doing it the way you're supposed to do it. And he seemed to be very comfortable with it. But yeah, I think Jason, just as long as he felt that I was being true to their story, and I don't think he knew I was going to pull back so many layers on their relationship, because I noticed very early on the whole handshake, good morning Tom, good morning Jason, and yet some of the crew even said to me, did they just call each other by their first names? People were kind of confused by it, and I kind of just, I filed that away, and just as we started kept filming, I was like, maybe there's something there to explore, right? But yeah, they didn't really need a lot of convincing. I think me stepping away from November to like January and not bugging them was probably the best sales pitch I could have given, because it was just like they got their time to consider it. I wasn't being like knocking. So yeah. Any other questions?
Tell us a little bit about the funding, production cost, and where the funding came from.
So I wish there was dramatic stories to this. This was an easy one. Just private investors, and being that it's like a kind of a big brand, it kind of sold itself. People kind of could get behind it, and the budget wasn't. It wasn't absurd given the amount of shoots that we did, about 25 days, and a pretty big crew now and again. So, I kept it very reasonable, because I produced it, and I was directing it and editing it. It was like I kind of knew what you didn't need to film and what you did. What's amazing is if we only excluded one shoot day, and that was at the request of like many people on the staff, because it was a notable boxer who I think is Ukrainian, but he was making some almost like pro-Russia statements. And this was like after he came to the restaurant. And so the staff was like, do not include him. They were like, what are you doing with that footage? Like different people came to me and was like, don't use it. Otherwise, you're seeing in the movie like literally everything other than, obviously I'm cutting everything down for time, but I think we have like 200 hours of footage, and I had to watch every minute, and listened to every take, even if there wasn't picture to sound. Like there's a moment in there where we weren't shooting at the time, and so the audio had to play, but I actually found the moment just like listening to every minute of sound. And I was like, whoa, that's important. I gotta put that in. While no one asked, I just want to share real quick. So the post of the key art, the backstory to that, I don't know if you all remember the Time magazine cover that had President Zelensky as the Time Man of the Year. So it was hanging in the window, I guess that was, when was that? It was like a year and a half ago, maybe. And I loved the design of it. And I said, whoever did that, I'm gonna get him to make the poster. And it's a very talented artist out of Connecticut named Neil Jameson. And I just cold emailed him. And I said, I would love for you to do it. And the idea would be to make a diptych that when you put the Zelensky cover next to your poster for the movie, it makes this diptych where it's like the West's answer to the East's war. And so now you have to go home and look at the two side by side. And he really did an amazing job. There's a lot going on. Obviously, there's a lot of little Easter eggs if you look at the poster in the lobby, but that was really one of those amazing and wonderful things. And I should comment also, David Duchovny came on board to narrate. I never worked with him, never knew him, called his agent, and he just was like, absolutely. And I went out to LA and worked with him, and his engineer that works with him, I said, I've never worked with David, are there any thoughts or notes? And you're like, oh, you're gonna love him, he's such a great guy. I was like, okay, great. And I said, I booked 4 hours with him, is that enough? He's like, oh, he'll be done in like no time. And literally in an hour and a half, he was done. Like he's so pro, he just nailed like everything. And then we were able to get David Sanborn, 6-time Grammy winning saxophonist. And that was another, like I always knew for I wanted to do an East meets West score where there was kind of this Ukrainian folk orchestral music, but then the Western sax for, representing New York City, and the characters that were American or like Ukrainian American would sometimes get the saxophone. And, my composer Ryan Shore, who's one of my best friends we're going back like 25 plus years now, he was in agreement. He's a big jazz guy, and he's like, yeah, sax would be great. And I'm throwing out all these names, and he goes, why don't we just get David Sanborn? I was like, I didn't go there. I didn't say that name, because to me that's like God in the jazz world. I'm like, we're not call God up. And he's like, no, why not? You got David Duchovny. And I was like, all right, well, you make the call. And he called, and he got him. And it was amazing. We gave him the entire score, which was over 60 minutes of original music. And I think of like the 20 cues, there was like, and there might actually be more than 20 cues, I take that back, there might be like 30 cues. I think 6 of them had saxophone, but he said, give me the entire score. And because he was writing from his home near Tarrytown, New York, and playing saxophone, I should say, not writing. And he came back and gave us not 6 cues, he gives 18 cues with saxophone. So he improvised. And there was one cue that, it's not a whole cue, but it was one saxophone piece that I didn't love what it was doing, and I cut it out. And I said to Ryan, I was like, will I pay a price for this when I die someday? I just chose to cut a David Sanborn piece out of a movie. I don't have this right. And he's like, no, you're fine. And he was in agreement, but no, he was so generous. I mean, we thought we were gonna get 5 minutes music from him, and he gave us like 35, 40 or something. It was great. Yeah.
But no accordion?
I don't think they had something kind of like a balalaika.
That's Russian.
Well, it was something like that. What would have been the Ukrainian equivalent?
Bandura.
That was what it was. So no accordion? I can't remember.
I didn't see it.
When
I'm
we-
always looking for accordion.
What was great was when we were just at Hot Dog Cinema up in Toronto, and the end song that Morgan Clamp did, he's a Toronto native, so we had him perform it live, and his like co-writer on the song, who's an amazing pianist, he played the accordion because we could only do like an acoustic setup in the theater. So if you had been there, you would have gotten your accordion live, and it was beautiful. It was really nice. Any initial questions? The first one's always the hardest to get us going, but in the back.
So this isn't on the topic of Ukraine in the movie, but Jason's mother abandoned him. And he's had no contact with her since?
No, I mean that's kind of a gray area that I thought I made clear, but it's a very quick moment when he's talking about how he relayed his life story to Vitaly to help Vitaly. There's a moment where you see Jason across 3 photos in time to adulthood with his mom, giving her a kiss on the cheek as an adult man to kind of say like, because he says like, you know, Vitaly needs to learn that she's an adult, she can do what she wants. And in the visuals, you're seeing that Jason made peace with what happened. But, you know, I'm always like, if I could go back, maybe I would have hit it a little harder and put another 10 or 15 seconds of that. So, you know, just there's so much going on, you would sit with you a little bit stronger. But no, they're still connected. It's just she just chose to go off and start a life in Hawaii.
So you made no attempt to interview her?
I don't think anybody was willing to even let me connect with her.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of let them, I just listened to the room as we went and as like life and story presented itself. I know, you know, it's going back a little bit of time now, but I would ask Jason, like, is your mom coming to town? Like, is there a point and I could get this sense that neither Tom or Jason was really, you know, going to present her like at any given time. And without them actually pointedly saying, oh, we're not sure if we want to involve her, it just became clear to me, don't ask, don't continue to ask, so.
So she went to Hawaii, he went to Hawaii too?
Yes.
Were they together there?
Well, part of and again, it would have been too much to dive into that given the bigger story, but the opportunity had to start like a Veselka in Hawaii was in part based on like relationships he was building around his mom there. I started to work on a segment about it and it just felt like such a deviation from like the heart of what the movie was. But I know for Jason, like when he watches the movie, all of that content is very difficult for him. And you know, he knew obviously I was exploring that side of the story, but it's not easy for him because, you know, his mom has seen the movie and I know that she wasn't completely pleased about, you know, the fact that she looks like she just kind of up and left. But again, it's one of those things where I hope the audience is getting as he's telling his story to Vitaly, and when you see the imagery, I'm hoping that people will kind of get, oh, he made peace with his mom, and they're still connected. So, yes?
This film was beautifully done.
Thank you.
Hold on 1 second, I'll get the mic to you.
Oh, great.
As I said, this film was beautifully done. What are some things that we could do now to support Veselka? And then we have also here in Charlotte, Mamlo's Bakery that's doing things for Ukraine here in Charlotte.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, there's still, like you see in the movie, there's still food items on the menu that they are giving 100% of the monies towards various Ukrainian groups like Razum for Ukraine. And they do have national orders. So you can order here, you know, direct from the restaurant. But double check online and see if some of those donations apply even to national orders. They're continually, you know, giving back to the community to this day. And they're expanding out to Brooklyn now. It was going to be just a commissary kitchen that was going to help support the 9th Street location that's in the movie. But they really benefited from, there was more space there that was usable as like a mini restaurant, and the city is going to give them outdoor seating. So they're going to have like a mini Veselka in Brooklyn now, which is really exciting for them. And it's going to open, I think, in a month. Yeah. Oh, I'll let you.
Yeah, I echo that. It was, just all around phenomenal documentary. Thank you for doing that. I was just curious how you came to, find out about this restaurant and the timing and, that piece of it.
So I went to NYU Film School, which, right around the corner on Broadway. And a good friend of mine constantly would say, oh, you know, you're always eating at the same Mexican restaurant or Chinese or pizza. He's like, you gotta go to Veselka, great Eastern European, great Ukrainian. And I started to go there with him and realize why he was singing its praises. And we'd go there, you know, it used to be 24 hours. So we would go at like 2 in the morning, bring a deck of cards, sit there and have challah toast and coffee for 2 hours. And unlike a lot of diners in the area, they would let us stay. They'd joke with us about who was winning, and you know, it just felt like you were in your own home. And I was introduced to Tom and Jason in November of 2021. I'd seen them around the restaurant, but I had never really engaged them. And I knew the back of the menu story of the 3 generations of ownership, or at that time, I guess, yeah, Jason. I didn't know too much of Jason's role in becoming the new owner, and I kind of learned that along the way. But the idea of the movie in November 2021, keep in mind, this is before the war. And so I went in there and pitched this idea that was still a father-son theme-centric story, but it was more of like a changing of the guard. You know, I was seeing this kind of reluctant owner in Tom. Actually, he's not a reluctant owner, he like the reluctant changeover. Like you could tell, even though he was retired, he really wanted to be there and be a part of it. And since the renovation was going to happen in a big way at that point, November 2021, it was really just going to go back in history and just show their dynamic and the changing of the guard. And then when the press started talking about the war in early 2022, they had kind of sat on the idea of the movie. They liked it, but they weren't getting back to me. And I emailed them and I said, you know, any restaurant in New York City could tell their story, but timing is everything, and what's the reason behind telling your story at a certain time? And I said, given how your storefront was created in the 50s as a place of refuge to displaced Ukrainians post-World War II, if this war happens, there's going to be parallels to explore. And they were in agreement, but we all said, if we're going to do this, it has to be done very gently. Like you saw, Act 1 is the first day we filmed, which was day 11 of the war. So we didn't like jump in on day 1. And anyway, like news crews were there all the time for that first week or two. And the staff didn't know the difference between us on day 11 or like CNN. So Jason would have to tell them over time, like, no, Mike is with us. Him and his team are with us. And I don't think they really knew what that meant until they came back for 25 days over a year and started to realize, oh no, this is its own thing. This is different than the news crews. And we all became very trusting of one another and family in a way. Okay.
Thank you, Mike, for showing New Yorkers at their very best, and also for your sensitivity towards Ukrainian expats.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, it was one of those things where, again, when we started to explore the idea of a documentary prior to the war, you know, New York was going to be a part of the story. At one point, I thought it was going to also talk about the evolution of Little Ukraine in a bigger, deeper way. So I knew New York was going to be a big part of it. But when the war started, yeah, you saw New Yorkers at their best. Maybe not Eric Adams, the mayor, but everyone else looked wonderful.
You can guess. I think that was his best.
Maybe, actually, given how the city is evolving, you're right.
This is prompting another quick question. Given Adam's great experience in this movie, or how you showed him like he is, did they comment about how they were depicted or how it was edited? Do they have anything to say? Did they offer to buy you the clip? So when put it in the film?
So what's interesting about that day is that was a press day. So, you know, Eric Adams knew that the cameras were on him. We were the only ones that were allowed to stay in the restaurant once he sat. We mic'd him. There's a boom over the table. We had multiple cameras. The cameras were close to him. It wasn't like we had a 1,000mm lens and he was at the other end of the restaurant spying. It was like, no, he knew. That's what makes his speeches so ultra strange because he knew we were there. But it was so important. That was the second day we filmed. And I didn't know he was coming until, I don't know if you remember in Act 1 towards the end, Jason like he says at the table, he's like, oh, the mayor's coming tomorrow, and we're gonna talk about this. That's the first time I learned the mayor was coming, and afterwards, when they were done with their dinner, I said, I heard you say something about the mayor coming? He's like, yeah, he's gonna be here. You wanna be here? And I was like, of course we wanna be here. It's the mayor of New York coming to your restaurant. So we just quickly prepared to be back really early the next day. That first shoot day was like 18 hours or something. And so we came back the next morning, and we're ready for him, not expecting that it was gonna be a very pivotal left turn into our act two of, basically saying, you can't look to your local government officials for everything. You gotta lead in your own right. So, it was up to Jason at that point to say, okay, Eric Adams isn't completely listening to me, so I'm gonna have to go off and help people.
So, was the movie released this year?
Yeah.
So, maybe Oscar nomination?
Oh, that's very nice of you to say that. It's funny. So we came out in February 22nd in Ukraine. We were in 4 cities and 6 cinemas across the country. Played there for a week, and then the next day, February 23rd, we opened in New York, LA, DC, and New Jersey. We ran in New York for 5 weeks, LA for 4 weeks, New Jersey 6 weeks, and since then we've been expanding all around the country, and we continue to this month. And the big goal obviously is to sell it to a streamer. We're finding it's very difficult, and we're not getting necessarily no's, but we're also not getting responses back. And the folks I know very well in the industry are saying, there's a couple challenges with a movie like this. There's not a lot of sharp edges, and everything right now is true crime or something with sharp edges. A movie like this, I don't know if you all saw Euro Dreams of Sushi that came out like 10, 15 years ago, and similar kind of father-son restaurant, gentle narrative. And it's like a huge hit for Magnolia Pictures, and it finds a home every few years when its license is up. That came out at a different time. Now, forget it. If that algorithm doesn't have true crime, death, murder, all this stuff, they're not going to want to program you, or it's going to be harder for them to program. The other thing I've learned, which was very shocking to me, is just the mention of war. Like airline distributors do not want to even put you on a plane if they talk about war. And I said to them, this is a war movie. That's a catalyst for story points. They said, oh, it doesn't matter. And you're also talking about Ukraine, and nobody wants to touch Ukraine. And I'm like, I think this is a pretty black and white narrative here with this war. But it's challenging marketplace at best right now.
One thing you got going for you, Rotten Tomatoes, 100% critics, 100%
Thank you.
audience.
Thank you.
That's rare.
Yes, and so continue afterwards, go home, take 5 minutes, go to IMDb, go to Rotten Tomatoes, give a little review, rank it, whatever they rate it, whatever they do there. And it's so important because that's where the streamers go, okay, our algorithm isn't being, the check boxes aren't being marked for this movie, but audiences clearly love it. And then they go, maybe we really should take this one serious. So please, take a few minutes today when you go home. I'll be real grateful to you.
Do you still live in the neighborhood?
Yeah, I have an apartment in Hell's Kitchen, so Midtown West. Yeah.
Well, he says he sponsored a lot of people to come over from Ukraine. Now, I happen to know that neighborhood very well.
Yeah.
And saw it go from all Ukrainians to Indian food on
Yeah.
the street.
Yeah.
Are a lot of Ukrainian refugees coming
Yeah.
into that neighborhood?
Yeah, I think they said, the governor, they said like 10,000 have come during the span of the war. I know Jason, in the span of us making the movie, had brought 10 people over, but we only covered the 5, basically. But yeah, this feels almost over dramatic, but I never thought when we were starting to make this that I was almost watching like a real time like Oscar Schindler's story developing. Here's a guy who just really needs to manage his business and do a renovation. Suddenly he's a humanitarian. I don't think he ever thought this would be his life, but yeah, they're very generous people.
Well, I just want to say, first of all, in terms of getting a wider number of people to see this and putting it on networks and so forth. It's certainly about Ukraine, but I think there's so many other things in here to talk about. For instance, generational issues, what happens when immigrants come from another country and assimilation, but then they go during times of war or political upheaval, they go back to their culture and that feeling. I mean, there's just so many other things. And perhaps if some of those things could be brought out in the, I hesitate to say marketing, but
Right.
you know what I mean,
Yeah.
of that, introduce it, because I didn't know what I was coming to see.
Right.
I knew I was coming to see a film about Ukraine, but in my mind, that immediately brought the war and the political situation. It is about that, but it brings it to life through so many other means. So I just have two questions
Sure.
for you, and then I'll not talk. Well, first, who produced the film? Did you produce it yourself, or were there other people who invested in it to produce it?
So I'm the physical producer, you know, bringing everybody together. From an investment standpoint, I did put some money in towards the end, but they're outside investors. So yeah, no good juicy stories there. The money came pretty easily.
Well, I didn't mean so much juicy or anything like that, but it seemed like, you know, I wondered if perhaps the family did to make this better known about how people can come together and support it, and it certainly makes you want to go to Veselka.
Right.
So, you know, I just wondered what the amount of investment was there, but the other question was, how would you explain to people the political situation there and why the United States should be investing in Ukraine, and why it's important, not just because there's war, because clearly there's war all over the world, but what is particularly happening here that's different, that makes it important to the United States to support Ukraine?
I just want to understand when you were saying, who did I express what? Reframe the question if you could.
Who did? No, I'm saying, how would you explain to somebody who said, okay, that's all very interesting, but why should we be supporting Ukraine just because this family likes it? No, there's other reasons why the United States should or should not support Ukraine.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying, well, how would you answer that question more politically of why it's important?
Well, I think the movie is just a perfect example of, you know, a real-time example of people that don't know where Ukraine is on a map or know any Ukrainians living in the United States. If they're seeing this on the news and they're questioning, like, why should we get involved? You see, again, in real time, these people are no different than anyone who's been living in this country for hundreds of years. They come from a democratic nation that's been taken from them back and forth over centuries, and they are really about family and community and hard work. And I mean, Vitaly is such a perfect example of someone who just keeps his nose down and all he cares about, he actually works another job at night, so he leaves Veselka and he goes off and works at the Beacon Theater uptown and manages there also. So, you know, I think he's a very good example of, he's no different than any hardworking American. And you know, if you know, we should all be out there, as Jason says, this is a fight for democracy. This isn't just a local issue.
That's more my point.
Yeah.
In other words, this is our fight too, but
Yeah.
if somebody's trying to destroy, there's a country that's an empire, I hope wants to be an empire, that it's trying to destroy Ukraine for its own purposes.
Yeah.
So you know, that sort of didn't come out that much, but I like that in the sense that it's good for discussion and it doesn't lead people down a path, you know, what it does is say, okay, think about this.
Yeah, and keep in mind, when I was finishing, so I try to stay away from politics at all costs. And well, you can though, because I think at the end of the day, when you watch the movie, you have the opportunity to not look at this as a right or left issue. This is a right and wrong issue.
Exactly.
And either you support the people because of what you're seeing on screen and the impact that a war is having on your fellow human being. Regardless of their political affiliation, that you just go, this is a fight for democracy and humanity. And that's why in the movie I don't ever try to take it to that point. And keep in mind, when I was finishing the movie, our country was still together on supporting Ukraine. The shift started to happen as I was just starting to finish the movie.
But that's
So-
because it was used politically, rather than, you know, what it shows people is it shouldn't be about your internal
Exactly.
politics. It's about your quest for democracy and
Yes.
defending people's rights.
1000%. Yeah.
Oh, hi, I guess I'm following my mom. I'm gonna try and be to the point, but
Yeah.
I've been wanting to see this film since January 15th of this year. So I've kind of been just writing about it the whole time out in the corner. So I'll try not to go on too long, but I have a ton to say. It's so good.
Thank you.
I mean, I'm into documentaries. I've been texting with my documentary friends from the Lower East Side. I first went to the restaurant in January, just before going to the theater, and I've gone a few times since then. I mean, all that stuff is really interesting. It's just so well scripted and made. I mean, like with the stuff about getting it out, like it's clearly not a Netflix film. You know, it's clearly not those things that you mentioned, but there's a place for it
Right.
that would love it. I mean, especially in The Room type run where it was playing every so often in the neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny because the Village East, that's where we played it for the
Sure, they would love it
5
there for
weeks.
the next 20 years.
Well, that's what we haven't proposed it. It's through the Reading Company, and they're very corporate. But we kind of soft pitched the internal manager. We're like, you know, you have Rocky Horror Picture Show showing at midnight on a Friday or Saturday, and you've been doing it for decades. Put us in there in your tiniest screen for the next 20 years.
What I'd say is it's the first, I'm obsessed with documentaries, and it's the first documentary I've seen in a long time where I wanted to see the sequel, the follow-up film to
Wow.
it. And I just wanted to mention one other film that I saw on the screen, which is 20 Days in Mirapool.
Yeah.
Right? And I mean, to me, frankly, I think that is a film more that wins an Oscar.
Mm-hmm.
It's a beautifully made film, and I hated watching it, and I did not enjoy going to see it. My limit for babies losing their bowels and dying on film, I just don't enjoy it. It's important. This is the other side
Right.
of 20 Days of Miracle. This is a feel-good, interesting film about the war. I think 20 Days of Miracle gets nominated for the Oscar.
Right.
This is a film that I'd want to see, like, you know, go out to dinner at Veselka. That's when I first saw it. You had the posters up there.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's an evening. Go see the
Yeah,
movie, go get dinner. If they have any extra room, maybe they could build a small screening room for 20 and just show it on a private loop. That's all I'll say for now. Thank you. That's so well done, dude.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been a real passion project. I mean, I sat in a chair for 10 months editing it.
How much time since you started to when you locked it?
It was under 2 years, so it was like 22 months. So we started filming the 11th day of the war, March 6th, and then we were basically wrapped with production the last day you saw, which was February 24th, a year ago. And then I immediately went into post-production, and the editorial was basically 10 months. And then you have many months with scoring the movie, color correction, sound mix. And so it was literally done on February 3rd. We world premiered at the Santa Barbara Film Festival on February 9th, and then a week and a half later we opened theatrically.
Right.
So it's been, somebody asked the other night, they go, so what's your next project? I said, I'm working on a project called Sleep, because I am so tired.
Trying to remember how to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
When you mentioned we worked on it, I was curious how big the crew was, and how did you have any Ukrainian speakers? How did you go about bonding with people who are going through a really traumatic time and don't speak English very well?
Thank you, great question. It was interesting because as you saw, like the big surprise of the movie was Vitaly coming around to share so much, because you saw on day one he had no interest, and it took like 6 to 8 weeks to get him to sit down for that interview, like, you know, the first interview we did with him. One of the ways that I kind of got him to open up was I started to treat him like a crew member. So he became the liaison to the Ukrainian and Russian speakers in the restaurant that I needed translation with. And then I started to kind of employ him. He translated everything you see on screen. So he became such a co-pilot with me that he began to open up, and he knew that I didn't have an agenda and I was just here to tell a truthful story. So outside of that, the crew was always like on average like 6-7 people. We usually had 2 cameras. A couple times we had 3. And you know, if you think that kitchen in the basement looks small on film, you got to go down there with like 2 cameras, a crew of 7 or 8 people, and try to stay out of everybody's way. It's like near impossible. So that came with a lot of challenges, but you know, we all were really respectful of Jason's needs, and he knew what we needed. So we just kind of worked in tandem to give everybody what they needed.
Speaking of 20 Days of Miracle,
Yeah.
any chance CNN would pick this up?
So that was one of the true passes we got. HBO Max, you know, the parent company, they also have CNN Films, and they took the trailer, not like a full screener of the movie, and CNN Films passed, and so did Max. But you know, again, based on the trailer. The trailer, I know for a fact, is a different movie than what you see is, but to me that's the point of a trailer. You don't give it all away. You give the heart or the spirit of something and hope that's enough, obviously, to hook somebody. But I was told with CNN Films that they're not really doing like one-off 90-minute pieces anymore. They're only doing these docu-series. So that's the new quick way for them to quickly say, we pass. They're always looking for a way to say no, I find, so that's the new excuse.
Near the end of the movie, when Vitaly and his mother are sitting apart from each other and he's quizzing her on English.
Yeah.
It looked like they were in a very nice apartment with a piano.
Yeah, that's because, you know, he stays, in the story you hear, he stays with Tom. That's Tom's home.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's that same raggedy gold chair. He's sitting in the same chair that Tom was sitting in for his interview, so. Yeah, and she's still here. She's living in Tom's apartment with Vitaly and Tom's family. And you know, what I find very interesting in exploring the stories is how, you know, bringing people's loved ones here, you know, they think like, oh, this is going to be part of the solution for them. And what they realize is, you know, there's such a big wound that it's really a Band-Aid that's hardly covering it up. And you see distinctly in the difference between Dima's mom and aunt and Vitaly's mom, they're very different perspectives, right? You have one that like really wants to leave her homeland and use this war as an excuse to just stay and reinvent herself. And then you have Dima's mom and aunt, which this moment always blows my mind, where Jason comes over and says, we love having you here. How do you feel being here? And they're like, we love it. We love being by our children. He steps away. Dima goes, you're thinking of going home when the war's over? And they're like, we're definitely leaving. You know, it's like they were covering it up for Jason. And you know, it's not like our proximity of cameras or eye changed. We were still there. Jason walks away. He asks the question, and the real truth comes out, which is basically, yes, we like being by our kids, but we really just want to be home. And that's the thing that, you know, is going to be very telling over the next few years of just the psychological impact that this war is having on all these poor people. It's terrible.
When I was saying how well made it was, I forget the reason I was saying that was to ask about the rest of your filmography, especially those things which might be available to see, because if you had an influence on how good that film was, I'd be interested in seeing your other film.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
My last documentary is called Floyd Norman, An Animated Life. And it was first on Netflix for several years, then Turner Classic Movies. Now it's on Criterion Channel, so you can watch it there. Okay. But it's about the first African-American animator at Disney. And he had a very storied career working with Walt. And then on his 65th birthday, they forced retired him. After all of that. And he his wife works at Disney, and rather than say, I'm leaving, he hijacks a cubicle in her office, and he stays. And
the documentary?
Feature documentary, yeah.
Feature. Have you done narrative as well?
Yeah, I produced a suspense thriller for Sony and a bunch of other stuff.
If you're looking for a niche, by the way, I loved seeing, and would love to see a documentary about Ratners, about Katz's, about Hungarian Pastry Shop by Columbia.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to see this. You said they're only looking for series. I mean, this one is especially, this feels like a foundational thing to a
Sure.
series almost. The fact that the war happens in it, but I feel like even without that, it felt closest to when I used to watch, I wasn't all into it, but like Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah.
Without the Bourdain, going to families in places like that, but you dug so much into it. It's more than TV.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so funny you say Anthony Bourdain, because when we were considering people to narrate, before we thought of David Duchovny.
He was great.
Thank you. Yeah, Anthony Bourdain, we were like, oh, if Anthony Bourdain had been alive, we would have had him absolutely narrated. But David was wonderful, and David, he grew up 2 blocks north of Veselka on 11th and 2nd Avenue. And he didn't really have a close-knit relationship with them, but kind of, he filmed a movie there in like the late 90s. Like he had these kind of in and out, moments with them. And I just called up his agent within a day of calling. They said he would love to do it, and he was amazing.
Yeah.
Just really sweet and very funny.
Just one day?
Hour and a half. I booked like almost 5 hours with him. And I was talking to the engineer before who had worked with him on X-Files and all this stuff. And I said, I've never worked with David. Do I need to know anything? And he's like, oh, he's amazing. He's super pro. I'm like, I got like 4 or 5 hours. Is that enough? He's like, watch. In an hour and a half, he was done. And he was like, do you want anything different? And I was like, well, let's take a break and we can both figure out.
How long had he had the script?
He got it all, well, no, I was gonna say he got it on the day, but that's not true. His team had it like 2 weeks before.
Wow.
And I don't know if he reviewed it because he never, I was expecting he'd come back and go, I'd like to do some revisions. I wrote it so that he could revise. And literally, he just read everything I wrote, which was just amazing. And just when you work with somebody of that caliber, directing them is amazing because you can say the subtlest, simplest direction and he just gets it.
Yeah.
And it's like, you don't even have to do more than that one redo take and you move on. It's really, really great.
I have a suggestion and a question.
Sure.
The suggestion, although it's in the form of a question, is have you talked to Phil Rosenthal?
No.
You know who Phil Rosenthal is?
No, I don't.
Okay. He has a series on.
He created Everybody Loves Raymond.
Everybody Loves
He
Raymond.
does this food.
But now he has a series, and he was actually just in Charlotte
Okay.
before, he does a show also about food. And he goes all over the world and just enjoys eating food. And there are people who are just like foodies who love him because it's just about his enjoyment of food.
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is, he might be interested in something like this, or presenting it, or even, and he has all the money in the world apparently. so he might have a means of distribution, or other films with you. Anyway, that was a suggestion.
And that's what it takes, really. It's like all you need is one person to champion a project,
Right.
and that's it.
And he would be perfect, and he seems very approachable. I did see the show here. He's very approachable. The other thing was, we mentioned Derek Adams.
Yeah.
But what about Governor Hochul?
She was great.
Yeah, how did that come about, though?
She just came in, it was kind of a very last minute thing where she just wanted to come in for lunch with her husband. And she came with no press corps. It was truly just a visit on the 2-year commemoration, just show support. And her team actually, after it was under 10 minutes, they asked us to turn off the cameras and because they just wanted to have a meal. So totally different, polar opposites from their cabin.
We've got time for one more.
Sure.
I have a minutia question.
Sure.
What I really appreciated is how you captured the gentrification and the changes of that street corner.
Oh,
and
cool.
that neighborhood. My husband grew up there.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I've heard stories, and you just really capture that well. I'm curious if you have any recollection who wrote the Village Voice review in '74.
No, and that was one of the things, Tom, he was working so hard, right, to take what Volodymyr had created to create what we know today. He was not very good at archiving anything.
Mm-hmm.
And it made for a real challenge because I was like, do you have any photos of even you and Jason together? Nothing. nothing inside the restaurant, like until they got a little older and you see it in the movie. The only reason you're not seeing things is like, we didn't have them. And when it came to the review, the one that's represented in there is actually not even the one from that year because we couldn't even find it in the archives. But we used one, I think, from a couple years after that in the early 80s when you see it highlighted on screen. But who came through for us was Vladimir's daughter-in-law, so Tom's sister-in-law. Like, yeah, that's correct. She had this treasure trove of photographs going back to when Vladimir was, 1903, that photo's in there. And she had more of like the blue room photos of like Vladimir in that back room with the wood walls, and that was so key to being able to just represent that visually. Tom had none of that, so it was a challenge. And I never set out to make like a Ken Burns movie. Like that first act was not what I wanted to do, but as I started to dive in, I was like, if you're really gonna set up the 3 generations and kind of that history of the restaurant, the neighborhood, you had to go down the Ken Burns road. But then when the war starts and we're towards the end of Act 1, I make a very, specific choice to say I'm gonna become a cinema verite movie from there on out. So, yeah, it had its challenges, but very rewarding.